Yo, yo, yo. This is candibknittin. I'm Candy B. I be knitting. And a happy new year, or almost new year, and a joyous Kwanzaa to everyone. Today is December 30th, 2023. So 2024 is very close to us. And so I thought with my last video of the calendar year, I would look back on some of the stats of my knitting for the previous year. I am very loosey-goosey with as far as tracking things go. I know you can get very intense with it. You can weigh balls before you start knitting and count yardage, etc., etc. And then some people don't track anything at all. I'm probably somewhere in the middle just because I do like a little bit of data. I am, in my professional life, a very data-driven person. I try not to let it infect my hobbies too much, but I can't resist sometimes. But also I find it personally helpful, especially I remember this is my third year knitting, and I remember the first year I was knitting, I didn't keep track of anything. I don't use Ravelry, and I would see people being like, "Oh, I knit this year, I knit this year," and I would be like, "Oh, I don't know," I would be comparing myself to them, and then I started to think about like, oh, what did I knit this year? And I would, I'm like, oh, I knit that. Let me be fair to myself. And I would forget stuff that I had knit, and I was like, actually, I'm doing a lot more than I think I am. And so I like to keep track of things just to give myself credit and to keep myself grounded in reality instead of being like, oh, well, that person knit more sweaters than me, or that person did this. And, just kind of keep it more inward and keep it like, where am I at? And I like to also keep track of the yarn, not to say, oh, you were bad this year, you bought too much yarn, or you didn't use enough of this type of yarn, or, you're not doing this or that. It's more so like, hey, I'm going to a festival this weekend. What do I need to, fill that particular hole in my stash? Or, hey, I really like this pattern. Do I have yarn at home for this? It's more just information than trying to beat myself up or trying to make myself feel some type of way. That being said, I did count my stash at the beginning of the year, and then last week I literally pulled everything out, dusted all my shelves, wiped everything off, checked everything for any kind of damage or, anything like that. I try to do that at least once a quarter or whenever I'm kind of feeling sort of out of sorts, because the way my yarn is set up is I have some things on shelves, but for the most part things are tucked away into plastic bins to prevent pest damage, to prevent things from getting tangled, to prevent a lot of sun damage, because I do have a lot of natural light coming into my home. And so I just like to every once in a while put eyes on things. I get a lot of inspiration from going through my stash, so I probably do that every couple of months or once a quarter, but this time I really went through, deep cleaned, counted everything. I'm gonna get more into that next week, because next week is gonna be like my plans for the future, and so I did get some data points and some information that's gonna inform my 2024. But as far as comparing this past year to this year, December 2022 to December 2023, about 160 to 170 balls of yarn December 2022. December 2023, as of, I'm going to put a big asterisk here and come back to the asterisk, about 160 to 170 balls of yarn. So that tells me, and I know everyone has their rules as to what's stash, what's not stash. I try to count anything that's more, that's basically by feel. Like if I've used a few yards just to bind something off, that's still a full ball of yarn to me. I don't really account for like yardage or weight or anything, so a 50-gram ball is pretty much equal to 100, like with the caveat of socks, because I know one pair of socks is 2 50-gram skeins, so I count that as one. But if I have a ball of mohair and a ball of Bernat blanket, I'm indifferent to those two things. So like I said, it's not the most technical thing. It's just purely just a little bit more information than I would have if I just bought yarn and just threw it in a closet somewhere. That being said, considering that I have balls of yarns that are dedicated to projects and project bags that I'm working from, I kind of know I'm accumulating yarn at a relatively constant rate. I'm using yarn at a relatively constant rate. If anything, I'm probably bringing in yarn faster than I'm using it, just based on what I know I have already dedicated to projects, which I don't count as stash. And so, you know, it's just information. Like I said, I'm going to get into what my goals are for next year. I do know, based on what I have left of my stash, I'm getting to the point where I have one ball of this, one ball of this, a lot of different weights. And so I'm still going to have to accumulate yarn in order to use the yarn I have in order to do the projects that I want to do. Just because of the disparate types of weights I have. I pretty much have yarn that 160 to 170 balls of yarn is inclusive of everything from, I have lace weight shawl yarn that I want to make shawls out of, all the way to super bulky yarn that I have plans to make sweaters out of. So it pretty much runs the gamut. And so just making sure that my mix is just right, as far as the yardage I need to complete projects in different weights. And, I don't feel any type of way about that, because I knew I went to the Shenandoah Fiber Fest this year. That was a big time for me to accumulate fiber and yarn. Lion Brand had a sale on their sock yarn that I love. Knit Picks had a sale on undyed yarn, which I do like to dye yarn for fun, etc., etc., etc. When I took my tally for this year, I did kind of break down those categories to be more specific. But getting back to the asterisk I had, I was like, oh, okay, 160, 170. But going into 2024, and I also got yarn for Christmas, of course. Going into 2024, I'm actually going to say my stash is over 200 balls of yarn, because in 2023, I got my spinning wheel for Christmas, and I very intentionally did not count hand spun yarn as a part of my stash, because I know at the beginning I had that caveat that, it's just data, it doesn't mean anything. But numbers, I am not, this is me telling me this, not me telling you how you should feel. In a perfect world, numbers would be meaningless to me as far as my hobby, and it's all fun. But also, there's something very real and human about attaching a number to something. And I now have about 40 balls of hand spun yarn. And going back to plans for 2024, I love hand spinning. It's super fun. I don't want it to become like you must do it like this, or it must have a project in mind, because it is my go-to thing to release all the stress of other areas of my life where I have to do these things. And so there's that part of me. But then there's the part of me that, as I said before, all my yarn is tucked away in bins. And so what does it mean that this thing that I've made that brings me so much joy is shoved in a bin because, it's in storage, and so I'm not really enjoying it the way I intended to. So I either need to come up with a way to display it in a way that will protect the integrity of it, or I need to use it in a project, or I need to give it away to someone that is going to use it in a project and get some sort of enjoyment out of it. Because right now I enjoy it while I'm spinning it, but then it just goes into this area. And so I do want to attach a number to that, because that's the only way I personally know to set a goal. I could say, I want to use more, but then if I don't have a starting point, then I don't know if at the end of 2025, or I'm sorry, I'm speeding up time terribly for y'all. At the end of 2024, if I have 100 skeins of hand spun yarn, or I have 10 skeins of hand spun yarn, where's the meaning in that? The next thing I want to talk about is how much yarn I actually used. And this is incredibly unscientific, because all I do is when I'm done with a project, I take the ball bands that are associated with that yarn, and if the ball is pretty much like a scrap ball is left, I count that skein as finished. If I, like I said before, if I use a few yarns to bind off, I put the ball band back on the ball that goes back in my stash. And so basically I just take the ball band, put it in a plastic bag, and then when I get a good chunk of ball bands, I put it into an Excel and add up and keep track of it that way. That way I don't have to hold on to a lot of ball bands. And those go into the recycling, and then I have a spreadsheet of the yarn I used and how much yardage how many balls I used of it. That doesn't account for scraps, doesn't account for a hand spun, doesn't account for partial balls if I have a majority of the ball left over. So super, super relaxed way of doing it, but does give me some information. I will, since we're talking about yarn I used, I am going to introduce what I'm wearing. This is the Night Nook Shawl by Stephen West. I'm showing this and taking it off now because I am getting warm. And I made this year for myself. And it's out of Lion Brand Shawl in a Ball. And I am wearing a Ranunculus. And this is fully spun yarn, I believe is the name of the brand, but I don't believe this person dyes yarn anymore. But I'll try to put information down below. And since this is not knitting related, but these are my earrings I got from Twines and Lines. And since we're still, just because Christmas is over, the holiday season is still here, so I still try to be a little festive. But for 2023, at the end of the year, I had 65 balls of yarn, or ball bands of yarn in my bag. And going into this year, I gave myself like the way off. You know, I knew this was ridiculous. I was just like, oh, it'd be really cool if I had 100 ball bands. Spoiler alert, I did not get 100 ball bands this year. I was going through my stash and looking for yarn that had ball bands, and I don't even have 100 balls of yarn that had ball bands on it, so I really wasn't gonna make it. But I like to give myself like way out there goals. So as of this year, I had that backwards. 2022 I had 67 ball bands. As of 2023 I had 65 ball bands, and so I did not make the 100 ball band goal, and I use less balls of yarn. But when you actually look at yardage and grams, I actually used way more yarn this year because I am convinced, in fact, because these balls of Shawl in a Ball, it's like 150 grams of yarn to a ball of yarn. And so I use like 6,000 grams of yarn in 2023 and used about 7,000 grams this year. And I used more yards this year, I think, because I did a lot more fingering weight projects this year. And so that's pretty exciting. Still relatively similar, so that tells me that I'm being consistent, and that, so that tells me, okay, when I go out and buy yarn, this is how much conceivably I can use in a year, and then I can then use that number to look at my stash and then say, okay, this is conceivably how long it would take me to knit through my stash. And that's all. I feel like that's helpful information for me. Helpful information when I'm shopping, helpful information when I'm planning projects. We're getting ready for the new year. I'm sitting, people are thinking about their Make 9, thinking about projects they want to make, and can I conceivably knit that much, in a year, or, can I use 100 balls of yarn? Obviously I can't, not at the pace I'm going now, and I don't intend to pick up the pace. That's not one of my goals. My goals are not to knit faster. My goal is not to knit more. I feel like I knit as much as I can right now, and with still being able to spin. I do need to start tracking my spinning somehow, because I feel like that's kind of like the missing piece. But like I said before, introducing numbers to something that is supposed to be fun might not have the intended purpose that I had in mind for it. So something to think about. As far as projects I made this year, I made 42 projects. I do count a pair of socks as one project. I do count a pair of mittens as one project. So, the individual items I knit is more, but as far as what I would call a complete project, like I made a lion and the lion had a separate sweater on, but that is one project to me. I think I did like something in the 30s last year. So again, pretty consistent, nothing to really write home about. Probably can count on doing something similar next year. The things that surprised me, because this time around I actually kept track. I just have, once again, a Excel and wrote down everything I made and who I made it for. And I don't know if y'all recall, but I previously talked about how, one, my favorite thing is to knit for myself, and two, my favorite thing to knit are shawls. And looking at the numbers, 25 of the 42 projects I knit were for other people. So majority of what I knit this year is for other people, which makes sense because most of what I knit for other people are socks. I made mittens for my kids. I made those small lions for my kids. And so a lot of my smaller projects, which tend to knit up quicker. Also, I made a few baby blankets, which I usually make. I made one out of worsted weight yarn. I made one out of bulky weight yarn. And so those tend to knit up a bit quicker. Most of the things I knit for myself are a bit larger, a bit more complex, like this shawl took months. So that makes sense, and I don't think that that's a big deal. And everything I knit for everyone else, I wanted to knit for them. It's not like I felt obligated or anything like that. I did keep track of how much. That includes things I frog too, because I count that as I knit something. I spent the time knitting it. I made 7 pairs of socks, which I thought was interesting because at the beginning of the year, a lot of people set the goal to knit a pair of socks a month, and then at the end of the year you have 12 socks and you have a pretty good collection of socks. And I thought to myself, oh, that seems pretty easy, and I do that. And I pretty much consistently have socks in the needle, and I'm knitting socks all the time, so it's a no-brainer that I want to have 12 socks by the end of the year. I knit 7 socks, which is about a pair of socks every couple of months. Because, and that tells me if I do want to do the goal of 12 socks a year, which I don't know if I want, it would be fun too, and I think it's interesting. I need to actually spend more time tracking that and thinking about that and prioritizing that. It's not my default to knit 12 socks a year, which goes back to, giving yourself more credit, but also being real with yourself and realistic. Like, oh, okay, I thought I was up here, but, not really. Going back to knitting things for myself and knitting shawls, I did only knit 3 shawls this year, and I only knit 1 shawl for myself, and the other 2 shawls were gifts for people, which was interesting. So I do need to spend some time prioritizing knitting more socks, because I do want to knit more socks, and I would like to knit 12 socks and 12 pair of socks in a year. But also I need to make more time to knit my shawls, because I do really, really enjoy that. And I did just get Stephen West Knits Best Knits Volume 3 for Christmas, and it is my goal to knit all of his shawls. And so I knit the Doodler this year as a gift, and then this is the Night Nook I knit this year. So, so that's 2 shawls, 2 new Stephen West shawls I knit this year out of, you guys could probably tell me about 60, 70 shawl patterns this guy probably has. And so I need to get cooking on that if that's one of my personal goals. I guess last but not least, excuse me, YouTube. I did start doing a YouTube this year, and I really didn't have any goal for that at all, because it's not something I did at the beginning of this year. I think I started this channel in October. So far, so good. My initial goal was to get 50 subscribers when I first started the channel, and now I have about 60 subscribers as of this video. You guys all might just be like, wow, this was a very talky video, unsubscribe. But I think that's pretty good, you know, because I don't think I know 50 people in real life, so that's impressive for me. So very exciting stuff. I have a bit of a sore throat, and so I am going to quickly touch on some things and then wrap this up because I don't want to make the situation worse. My most popular YouTube video was one where I talked about my plans to knit with my hand spun yarn, which I thought was really interesting because I didn't think a lot of people, I know a lot of people watch knitting YouTube, but I didn't know a lot of people were into the spinning aspect. And so I just wanted to quickly shout out, this is Ply Magazine. This is my first issue of Ply Magazine I purchased. It's got Lauren, aka Mother Pearl, on the cover, and that's why I bought it. But inside of here is an article by Laura Linneman, who is one of the knit girls, and I'll link to their channel below if somehow you've found me but not found them. And she has an article in here about things to consider when you're, this whole issue is the sweater issue, but she talks about patterns that lend themselves well to using hand spun, and she actually talks about brioche. So it's good to know that I was on the right track. And so check this out if you have never checked out Ply Magazine. It might be available to you locally. I did have to order it because they do not sell it in my local yarn shop. So check that out. I did want to show you some of my Christmas gifts and some of my cast on, but like I said, my throat is bothering me a lot. So I'm going to leave it here. Next week, I'm going to transition from talking about some of the data here into what that looks like for goals in 2024. I love New Year's resolutions. I love goals. I love numbers. I know that's not everyone's jam. So thank you for rocking with me. I didn't say any of this in my last video, but I am at Rulude on Instagram. I am at Rulude on Ko-fi. You can send me an email, candibknittin@gmail.com, or leave me a comment below. Let me know if you're looking back at 2023, if you kept track of anything in 2023. If you don't like to keep track of anything at all, ever, let me know in the comments. I hope you're having a happy Kwanzaa if you celebrate. I hope you have a happy and safe new year. Until the next time I see you, which hopefully will be next week. Peace.